How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to the channel here. This is actually going to be my first DraftKings player picks. This is going to be week 1 of the NFL season. I'm just going to do DraftKings prices. I'm not going to go into the FanDuel prices, but I'm assuming most of them are pretty similar. So if you want to kind of take some of the knowledge of some of the statistics and stuff and transfer them over to FanDuel or to Yahoo or whatever website you may be using, feel free to do so. But the prices you're seeing here are DraftKings prices, so just keep that in mind. DraftKings is a full point PPR scoring system, so that does impact quite a bit on who I take because of the full point versus the half point that FanDuel has. So just keep that in mind. But let's go ahead and move on into the video here. So let's go ahead and hop into the quarterbacks for week 1. So the way that this is going to be laid out is there's going to be a value player on the left, a safe player in the middle, and a risky player on the right. I'll have that for all 3 of the main positions, so quarterback, running back, wide receiver. I won't be doing tight end. I won't be doing defense. There's just not really a point because most of the time those are pretty obvious plays. But we're going to go and hop into our quarterback pick here. So our value player for week 1, I'm going to go with Sam Darnold. He comes in at a price of only $5,000, which is very cheap. He's facing the New York Jets, who rank 4th worst in yards per game against passing and 5th worst in passing touchdowns allowed per game. So that's not very good. He also has a significantly improved weapons here in Carolina. He was obviously traded over from the New York Jets. He now has Christian McCaffrey, who's healthy, DJ Moore, Robbie Anderson, and they drafted Terrace Marshall, who looks like he could be a very good player and definitely a good red zone threat. So he's definitely upgraded quite a bit there. He's virtually minimum price for a starting quarterback. There's not many quarterbacks below his price that will be starting week 1, so he's about as cheap as it can get while also having a good matchup and great weapons. In his preseason outing against the Steelers in their last preseason game, granted they did play the Steelers backups, he went 19 for 25 for 162 yards and 2 touchdowns, which is very impressive. We'll definitely take that. And McCaffrey did not even play in that game, so that makes it even more impressive. It's unlikely that you'll need the savings to go down to $5,000 to only get Sam Darnold, but it is an option if you want to create a very high upside lineup. You can do that. My safe player, however, is going to be Kyler Murray. He comes in at $7,600, so I believe the second most expensive quarterback. He's facing the Titans, who rank 5th worst in yards per game against passing and 6th worst in passing touchdowns allowed per game. Last year, he averaged 51 rushing yards on 8 attempts per game in 2020. He also had 11 rushing touchdowns last year. He improved his completion percentage from 2019 to 2020 while also improving his yards per attempt, his touchdowns, and his QBR, which is all great signs that that trend could possibly continue on into next year. They also added rookie Rondale Moore in the draft, who is a sneaky value stack at wide receiver. You might be seeing him later in this video. Just going to go ahead and hint at that. But yeah, so my safe player, Kyler Murray, obviously a really good play. If you don't want to pay up that much, though, I have another option here. So we got Jalen Hurts as our risky player coming in at $6,400. He's facing the Atlanta Falcons, who were last in yards per game against passing and 2nd worst in passing touchdowns allowed per game. He has high mobility upside. He averaged about 11.5 rush attempts per game in his 4 starts that he had last year, which is very good for a quarterback. He also added the Heisman winner Devontae Smith in the draft, so that gives him a really nice weapon. Zach Ertz stayed. He's got both Zach Ertz and Dallas Goedert as tight ends. That's always a plus. And although he wasn't a very accurate passer last year, his highest completion percentage was only 56.7 completion percentage in his 4 starts. That's one thing that really worries me about this. I'm not too happy about that, but it is the dream matchup for a QB, so I do believe it can outweigh the negatives, but that's why he's my risky player after all. All right, moving over to the running backs. We have a couple good options here, but my value player is going to be Chase Edmonds. He's coming in at $4,600, really, really cheap. He is the lead back in a split backfield with James Conner, so we don't really know how many snaps each of them is going to get. I'm assuming James Conner is not going to get nearly as many as Chase Edmonds. I think it'll be probably like a 60-40 split or so. Chase Edmonds is also probably the better receiving back. He did have 53 receptions last year, and he also averaged 4.6 yards per attempt in 2020, so it's very impressive out of him. We definitely like that as a DraftKings player, especially a running back, to get that PPR upside. He averaged 10.5 fantasy points per game in 2020 as the backup / 3rd down running back, and he should have a bigger role now and continue to improve on those numbers now that Kenyon Drake is gone. And I don't believe James Conner is going to impose as much of a threat as Kenyon Drake did, obviously. This game here, the Cardinals and Titans game, does have the 2nd highest applied total. It's 52.5. So it's pretty high total, but the Arizona players I'm noticing are really cheap, and we'll get into one last player here soon. I really like a lot of the Arizona players. Obviously, DeAndre Hopkins is expensive, but Chase Edmonds being $4,600 as a starting running back with pass catching upside is just way too low in my opinion. I'm hoping he gets double-digit rush attempts and around 5 to 6 targets as well to go along with that. So my safe player at running back, which is probably going to be a lot of people's safe player, is just going to be James Robinson. Now, I picked James Robinson as a safe player. He's $6,400. I could have easily said Dalvin Cook, Christian McCaffrey, someone like that, but in reality, everyone knows those are going to be safe players. At that point, it's just a coin toss on which one's going to do the best. People can lock in Christian McCaffrey and just move on with that. No big deal. But for me, I went with someone a little bit cheaper, give you a little bit different perspective. So James Robinson, he's facing the NFL's worst run defense, who doesn't have J.J. Watt anymore. ETN being injured, he now has a huge role again. Just like last year on his rookie campaign, he is a third down back as well. Pretty good pass catching abilities. So we like that, having a 3-down back that's really good in DFS. Last year he had 1,400 total yards and 10 touchdowns as a rookie, so some really impressive numbers. And then this year he's just upgrading at quarterback with having number 1 overall draft pick Trevor Lawrence, one of the best prospects we've had in possibly ever at the QB position, which is just going to help this offense move the ball down the field, get points, give him more opportunities to get touchdowns in the red zone, stuff like that. And he's $2,000 or more cheaper than the top running backs and has a really high floor and a really high ceiling as well. Maybe not quite as high as those guys, but for the amount of savings you're going to get, it is a really big difference in the cash to build your lineup. So I think James Robinson should be in pretty much everybody's lineup, but that is totally up to you. Moving over to a risky player, though, we have Najee Harris coming in at $6,300. Pretty much the same price as James Robinson, and he's facing Buffalo, who ranked 20th in the NFL in yards per game against rushing at 123.2. He's going to be the absolute workhorse in this Steelers offense. I'm thinking he's going to see around 20 to 25 touches. He has very high pass catching upside and could easily get about 60 or so catches this season, maybe even more than that. I think he could possibly get into the 100 target kind of range as well. Last year, the Steelers O-line ranked worst in the NFL and last in rushing, so that is why he's kind of a risky player. They did, however, pretty much revamp the whole offensive line. 3 starters gone, 3 known starters gone as well at that, and they pretty much bring in a whole new offensive line, players moving around, stuff like that, and in the preseason, this offensive line graded out very well, actually, so that could be a positive. It doesn't obviously say too much. It was the preseason, but looking at it from an outsider perspective, even though I am a Steelers fan, I think our offensive line, it can't really get worse if we're being honest here. And if you go back and look at the preseason games, you could just tell how good of a pass catching upside he has, because in the game against Detroit, he caught a little drag route or whatever it was that should have only been like a 5 or 6 yard gain, and he broke it for like 45, 50 yards, something like that. And to go along with all that, he also has a new offensive coordinator in Matt Canada. Matt Canada has came out and already said that he's wanting to run the ball a little bit more, get under center a little bit more, play action, stuff like that. So that's definitely going to benefit Najee Harris. Hopefully it benefits the entire offense. And Najee Harris, 6,300. Definitely a risky play, but he has potential to be one of the top running backs this week as well. All right, last but not least, we're going to be heading into the wide receivers here. So my value player for wide receiver is going to be Rondale Moore, coming in at the minimum price of $3,000. He's a value stack to pair with Kyler Murray, who's also obviously a very safe QB to take. You don't have to necessarily stack Kyler Murray, Rondale Moore, and Chase Edmonds, but being how cheap the 2 skill position players are, you can definitely do so because it allows you to get to Kyler Murray, who is a more expensive quarterback, and then you also have some money to play around with in your other running back and wide receiver positions. But yeah, so he is facing one of the worst secondaries in the entire league in the Tennessee Titans. They rank bottom 5 in pretty much every category. They're not that good. He's replacing Larry Fitzgerald, who was just too old to be on the field last year and kind of held the team down. And he is minimum price, so if you needed him to get to 3 times value, it would only be 9 points. So if he gets 6 catches for 30 yards or something like that, he gets his 9 points. He hits 3x value. He does great for you right there. In college, as a freshman, he had 1,258 yards and 12 touchdowns receiving at Purdue. Now, I will say he did get injured a couple times after that, I believe. He did not play all his games for the years following that. So keep that in mind. But that was as a freshman. He did play very well. And in the preseason, he got 3 rush attempts as well. So I believe they are kind of on like jet sweep and end around. So if he gets a couple rush attempts along with a couple 5, 6, 7 targets, something like that, he could definitely hit value, and I think he's a pretty safe pick here. Definitely really good value. Now, our safe player, none other than Keenan Allen. He's one of my favorite players in the league, and it's just because I love doing PPR stuff. I've always loved DraftKings. All my fantasy leagues, I try to make them PPR. A lot of people don't like PPR as much, but Keenan Allen, he is just an absolute target monster. He averaged 10.5 targets per game last year. And he left 2 games earlier where he only had 2 targets and 3 targets in those games. Otherwise, he would have led the NFL in targets per game over Devontae Adams. In those 12 games, though, that he did play, that he was healthy in, he averaged 8 receptions per game, which would have ranked 2nd in the NFL. And this year, they added Rashawn Slater in the draft, so their offensive line definitely tremendously improved. And that's just going to help Justin Herbert have more time in the pocket to be able to find Keenan Allen downfield, be able to find all his receivers, and hopefully put up some points. Now, I will say they are playing a very tough matchup because they are going up against the Washington football team. But Keenan Allen, at this point, he's pretty much matchup proof, and he is definitely a top 3 route runner in the NFL. So keep that in mind. There is a little bit of a risk to it, but overall, with the amount of targets and stuff that Keenan Allen's going to get, and at only $6,900, this is a very safe play. I would lock in Keenan Allen for sure. My risky player is going to be T. Higgins. I had a couple options here, but I ended up going with T. Higgins, mostly because I just felt he was more risky. I was looking at Marvin Jones as well, but I don't think Marvin Jones is really risky at all, actually. I think he's more of a value player. So T. Higgins is going to be my risky player this week. He's facing the Vikings, who have a bottom 10 secondary in the NFL. He gets Joe Burrow back from the injury, so that's always a positive, getting his quarterback back. I believe that he is going to be the WR1 on this team. I think he is going to be the number 1 guy. His target share last year was pretty much identical to Tyler Boyd. It was 20.9 to 20.8, so they're essentially the exact same. Last year he had 908 yards in 14 games, which comes out to be about 64.9 yards per game, which is very impressive out of a rookie, especially considering the fact that he had not exactly the best quarterback throwing him the football for the second half of the year. He averaged 7.6 targets per game, which is pretty good as well. That's definitely going to help the PPR fantasy points. They did add Jamar Chase in the draft, but if you do know much about the preseason, if you watch any of it, Jamar Chase struggled badly in the preseason with drops. And I just believe that T. Higgins is likely going to be the go-to guy, at least early in the year. It could be different. I mean, Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, they played together at LSU, so maybe they already have that connection that just once week 1 starts, they just kind of spark it and whatnot. But I believe T. Higgins is going to be their number 1 guy. But at this point, it's kind of a guessing game of who's going to be their number 1 guy, who's going to lead the league or lead the team in target share. Could it be Jamar Chase? Could it be Tyler Boyd? Or could it be, in my opinion, T. Higgins? You also have to keep in mind, Joe Mixon will be playing now. He's going to take some targets. He kind of just sat out most of the year last year, said it was an injury. I don't think it really was all that much of an injury. There's no real point in playing. So keep that all in mind. T. Higgins has some upside, could also be a bust. Not really sure, but I like him a lot. I would maybe test him in a couple GPPs. So to end this off, I'm just going to touch on tight ends real quick. This first week, tight ends really, if you want to pay up for Kelsey, you can, but I don't see a point in paying up for Kelsey. $4,400 for Kyle Pitts. Just lock him in your lineup. Don't think twice. Go lock him in. If you want to take the Jalen Hurts stack, you can go put Zach Ertz or maybe Dallas Goedert. Not that big of a deal. Just put Kyle Pitts in your lineup. Don't even think twice. For defenses, just look at whoever is the cheapest home favorite. Play that defense. Move on. That's pretty much how DFS works. Cheapest home favorite. Put that as your defense. Don't pay up for defense. Don't pay up for tight end for the most part. If you want to, you can try it, but typically it's not going to work out all that well. Put in Kyle Pitts, $4,400. He's going to be a stud. Just do it. Move on. We're not going to go into tight ends. That's going to conclude week 1 for these picks. Make some money off these guys. Let's all just hope for a really great week of football. I'm recording this on Tuesday, so we got 2 more days until the season kicks off on Thursday. I won't be able to actually watch a whole lot of the games because of a wedding that I have to attend to on Sunday, so I'll be keeping up to date with it all, though. On to next week. I'm going to go ahead and start researching here soon. If anything changes, I'll let you guys know. Check out my Twitter down in the description below if you need updates at all. If anything changes to these picks, I will tweet out the changes and whatnot, or I'll also probably leave it in the comments down below. So that'll be it. Hope you all enjoyed the video. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. This is a new channel, so I would really appreciate all the support. And we will see you all next week for week number 2.